Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time. I am Paul Ndiho. Joining me from his home in Arlington, Virginia is Shaka Sally himself, aka the Kawale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Ndugu Paul.
How are you?
I guess I have to say that I remain simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Mother Africa. I lost three people
Wow.
in 1 week. Yeah, we are talking about a former Ghanaian president, Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, retired but certainly not tired when he lived. I also lost another individual in New York City, a man who comes from your territory, Eric Kashambuzi, a man that used to be a UN senior official or executive for many years, had retired and had been retained as a consultant. He had been on several editions of Straight Talk Africa and shared his wisdom, knowledge, and experience with our global audience. May his soul rest in eternal peace. I also lost a young lady in Los Angeles, the daughter of Carol Bugari Baruru. So it has not been really a pleasant week, as it were.
Ndugu Shaka, my deepest condolences to you.
Thank you very much.
Of course, here at Shaka Extra Time and Straight Talk would be remiss if we did not mention the passing of Ghana's longest serving leader, former flight lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings, who died last week. He was an influential figure of our generation, certainly somebody that has left a mixed legacy, so to speak.
You know, he was such a very interesting but challenging newsmaker. I recall that I had the honor and privilege of interacting with him both in the studios in Washington and in his hometown of Accra, the Ghanaian capital. We got to know each other pretty well, to the extent that we found, of course, that we did share some things. Both of us had served in our respective national armies. He had served as a pilot. I had served as a paratrooper. It was very interesting. We also, I think, in some way, shared pretty much the same ideology, which was of being advocates of social, economic, political justice for all of us.
Over the years, you had several opportunities to interact with the late President Jerry Rawlings. What struck you the most about the guy? What kind of person was he?
He was generally well read. He was very much socially and politically conscious. He was a man that you could say had a revolutionary sort of zeal, a revolutionary spirit. He was a very controversial figure that, made people obviously have different views of who they thought he was. He, however, struck me as somebody that was socially, politically, culturally, and economically sensitive to ordinary people. He felt at ease with ordinary people. He was a very, very pragmatic individual. He was the type of person, however, who somehow was not liked by the intellectual elite. he criticized them very fiercely. He felt that they were the type of people who simply talked the talk without walking that particular talk. He was also, outside of studios, he was an interesting man. We exchanged social amenities so many times in different parts of Ghana, sometimes, in fact, in other countries on the continent. And of course, here in the United States, whenever he visited North America. He was an incredible family man. He loved his children, his wife, Nana, who you know, and his son and daughters. He loved them very, very dearly. He loved the Ghanaian people. He was a selfless type of guy. I can remember, frankly, at one time, we were walking downtown Washington, D.C., and he wanted to make a telephone call back home. Can you believe this is a former president? This is a man that has a retirement package, which would include paying for his telephone calls anywhere. But guess what? He would actually go and look for subsidized cards so that he could not put a lot of unnecessary weight on the backs of the ordinary Ghanaian taxpayer. That's the kind of guy I remember.
I could not agree more, because one time I was in Accra, Ghana, and I saw him in action walking down the streets, and I was like, wow, who does that? But you bring up a very good point. I think the first time I interacted with him, it was courtesy of you when he invited us for dinner, and as we were talking about democracy in Africa, I think I said something, and he picked interest in one of the things that I said. Then he wanted to know more why I wanted to become a reporter. So he encouraged me to be, if I was going to be a reporter, to be the best that I can be, because reporters, at the end of the day, become the voice of the voiceless. And through you, I got to know him on a personal level.
Yes, he was an incredible man. I did not sometimes agree with some of the things that he did. For example, I remember that I really, really admired him when he led the revolution of 1979 and presided over a government very briefly, 3 months before having an election and handing over power peacefully to President Liman. Unfortunately, a man that about a year later, he actually overthrows. And from that time, he stayed for a very, very long time in power. Later, he even changed tact and removed the military uniform and put on civilian, suits as a civilian president. And, and also came up with a constitution that had term limits, which he actually observed. He never, unlike some of his colleagues across the continent, who had themselves shot themselves into power, he never actually engaged in the political constitutional shifting of the goalposts. He served his 2 terms, which were really sort of democratic. He had already served about 10 years, which were a bonus. And he handed over, guess what? Not to the person that he had intended to hand over to, a man who had been his vice president, Professor John Evans Atta Mills. But he actually handed over to President John Kufuor from the opposition, who had actually won the election. He handed over to him peacefully. And in fact, I think that history should be able to find it very easy to judge him as perhaps one of Africa's transformative presidents. In fact, he sort of laid the groundwork for the democracy that is enjoyed in Ghana today. It was Jerry Rawlings and his colleagues.
How would you respond to some of his critics who said that, yes, he was a very transformative figure, but at the same time, he was also a very controversial figure in a sense that when he took power, initially when he took overthrew the government, he literally did a lot of crazy things in that country. He executed a lot of people. He denied those things, but every source of piece of evidence pointed at him making orders, giving orders for his soldiers to execute some of those people.
You know, it is a subject that we used to talk about a lot. As a matter of fact, even my first interview with him, I actually asked him, why did you kill those former Ghanaian leaders? Why did you have them, executed on a firing squad? He said, Shaka, I take responsibility because the buck stops with me, because I was the head of state. But the fact remains that I was not the one that made those decisions. And he was right, because later I cross-checked. In fact, I ended up even talking to the guy that led the successful coup that actually rescued Jerry Rawlings from prison. Because a lot of people may not know, but Jerry Rawlings' first attempt to overthrow the Ghanaian government failed. And he was immediately arrested. He was essentially tried publicly. And he made an incredible statement that earned a lot of sympathy to the nation. So when a second military coup attempt, which later succeeded, that military coup was led by a Major Bwachichan. Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings was in prison. So the coup actually was led by Major Bwachichan, but the majority of the soldiers who participated in it were the type of people that are classified as non-commissioned officers and their troops. Apparently, those were the people that decided that the former Ghanaian leaders had to take responsibility for causing the kind of damage they had done to their country. So by the time Jerry Rawlings is released from prison and is honored to serve as the symbolic leader of that particular coup, the decision had already been made. And so really, basically what he had done is when he came out, everything was a fait accompli. So he was not the one actually that made the decisions that resulted into the death of those particular individuals. I have met some of the children of some of those men that actually were publicly executed. And they really complained, and they didn't like, nor did they ever forgive Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings. But it is a misunderstanding that he is the one that ordered the firing of, the killing of those people. At least that's the information I have.
That's a very interesting point. Going back to the point I alluded to earlier, him walking the streets of Accra or Takoradi, it's remarkable to see a president of a country, a former president of a country, walking down the streets without bodyguards, just minding his business, going to local joints to eat local food. How remarkable is that?
As a matter of fact, when I first met him in Accra, in Ghana, he was driving himself in a Jaguar. It was actually, I found out, a used Jaguar. It was pre-owned. And he had a couple of other old pre-owned Jaguars at his residence. He was driving a Jaguar, and I stopped him, and he actually stopped. And he asked me to come in the vehicle. I came in the vehicle, and he stopped by the nearest Chinese restaurant. He bought me lunch with some of his colleagues who were some of his former cabinet ministers. And you cannot believe it, all the waiters in that restaurant will be coming to him. They were basically, it was like really, they worshipped him. But they even though they worshipped him, they looked at him as a ndugu, a comrade, a brother. That's the kind of guy that Jerry Rawlings was. He was very, very free. As a matter of fact, I read that there was a time when he actually went downtown Accra and started guiding traffic.
Yes.
As if, in fact, he was a police officer.
Yes. Yeah. You know, traffic can get crazy in Accra sometimes. So
Yeah.
I guess he had to step in because the traffic men were not doing their job.
Yeah.
What can African leaders, especially people who have overstayed their welcome, people who overthrew their governments, came to power, and have been around since they took the reins of power, what can they learn from the example of Jerry John Rawlings?
I think that is very simple. That you get the opportunity, you serve. It is about serving. It is not about controlling. It's about getting an opportunity to serve your people. And that service has to be temporary. You serve your time if, for example, there is a constitution that says you have to observe term limits. It is 1 term of 5 years or 2 terms of 5 years. Just serve those 2 terms and go back home. And there are so many African presidents so far who I know, who I interviewed when they were in office so many, many years ago, and who I have visited again later after they have served their term. The last time I was, for example, in Malawi, I paid a courtesy call President Bakili Muluzi. He lives in the Malawian commercial capital of Blantyre. He has a good retirement. He has security forces guarding him, providing him services and what have you. He lives in a very beautiful mansion. He told me he couldn't believe that he is enjoying his life much better than when he was in office as president. You look at Liberia, for example. You have the first female democratically African president, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. She served her terms. She is back home. She even won a Nobel Prize, a Nobel Peace Prize to boot. You have former Ghanaian president, John Kufuor. You have another Ghanaian president who lost an election while he was in office and considered defeat with grace, John Dramani Mahama. He is there, and I'm told he's trying to make a comeback and run for office again. I think that what African leaders really should know is that under no circumstances should they view themselves as if they were kings or as if they were monarchs, because they are not. They are presidents. And because they are presidents, it's because they are being hired to play that role by their own people. So they should be able to account to the people who helped put them in office.
That's a perfect segue to our next segment. Ethiopia appears to be approaching civil war, fighting between forces loyal to the federal government headed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and Tigrayan People's Liberation Front, TPLF, has claimed hundreds of lives over the last couple weeks, couple days. What could have gone wrong in Ethiopia? Ethiopia was on the verge of becoming this beacon of hope for Africa.
When you look at the behavior of the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front forces, the manner in which they behaved. First of all, you know, there was an election that was planned to happen in Ethiopia, but due to COVID-19 or to the coronavirus pandemic, it was postponed. But the authorities in the Tigrayan region decided to hold what they called an election. And the interpretation was that they were taking that action as a way of trying to secede from Ethiopia. And so, of course, the Ethiopian government had to figure out a way of restoring order in that part of their region. When you look at the TPLF, you have to look at them in a historical context. The TPLF used to be an armed struggle force. It was a liberation force, so to speak, which captured power in Ethiopia in 1991, overthrowing the Ethiopian strongman, Colonel Mengistu Haile Mariam. Now, you know, of course, that the strongman of the TPLF was a man called Meles Zenawi. Meles Zenawi unfortunately died in 2012. He was replaced by his former deputy prime minister, Haile Mariam Desalegn, who occupied that position for nearly 5 years until Abiy Ahmed replaced him. The TPLF, which had actually originally acted as a nucleus and in fact an epicenter or the dominant party in what became the Ethiopian People's Democratic Revolutionary Party, the ruling party, which was made up of several other political parties. It lost power soon after Abiy Ahmed had taken office. The reason being that whereas the Tigrayans are said to be about 6% of the population in Ethiopia, Abiy Ahmed's group of Oromo is considered to be the majority in Ethiopia. And so there had been, of course, as you remember, protests in Ethiopia, especially in the Oromia region, where the
so
youth...
many people have died too.
That's right. And so what happened is power changed hands. When the power changed hands, the new leader or new prime minister, Abiy Ahmed, tried to consolidate himself into his position. And as he tried to consolidate himself in his position, some of the senior government officials coming from Tigray, Tigray
area.
lost their positions. It was not very easy for them to accept the fact that they had lost power. And so they basically, most of them, withdrew back to Tigray or to their region and decided to consolidate themselves, hoping that they would probably cause national chaos, through which then they would have perhaps a much bigger bargaining chip. But I think that it is really a matter of time that their rebellion will probably come to an end.
You said that Abiy Ahmed is a man of peace. He has a Nobel Peace Prize to boot. But would you agree that maybe that's also subject to debate? Because when you think about it, since taking power in April 2018, we've seen killings, we've seen arrests in Oromia, young people being killed, young people being arrested. His critics, people running media houses being arrested. People would argue that he's not any different than his predecessor, Meles Zenawi.
So when you talk about Abiy Ahmed sort of presiding over a situation that is not peaceful, not stable, as a prime minister, as a head of a government, if there is a group that violates the law or causes mayhem or violence or what have you, he has no choice but to react and attempt to restore order, as they say. So I do not think that I have seen really what you would consider to be, again, incontrovertible evidence that is not liable to falter, that suggests that, in fact, Abiy Ahmed may not be different from Meles Zenawi.
How about people who said that maybe perhaps that was a facade, it was a show, it was acting? You do this, create reforms, create a government that has a semblance of representation. But when you're trying to consolidate power, and when you don't get that power, your true colors come out.
Again, as I said, you need to give the man the benefit of the doubt. The man did not declare himself an emperor, even though, in fact, there is a historical precedence. Ethiopia was the land of emperors. I have not yet heard Abiy Ahmed claiming to be an emperor. He has, in fact, instead talked about holding elections. Let us wait and see if, in fact, he can hold elections and that these type of elections will be respectable, will be the type that every Ethiopian respects the results, if in fact the results are reflections of the will of the voter or the will of the people, but not the will of those individuals who will have counted the votes.
Well, let's end it there, Shaka. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ndugu.